Welcome back to Unpopular CHIMPs, the series where I take some of the more underused towers in BTD6 and put them to good use in CHIMPs mode. Just gonna quickly mention my mic quality kinda fucking sucks in the voiceover here. I was kinda stuck with it. I did everything I could, did a bunch of editing to try and make it sound better, and it sorta worked, but there's still a few times where my voice kinda fades out at points where it shouldn't because of everything I've been trying to do. Hopefully you can bear with it. Anyway, back to the video. This episode, I put up to a vote, and was surprised to see that you guys actually voted to see me use the Sentry Champion to beat Midnight Mansion. Not gonna lie, this vote basically ended up being the exact opposite of what I expected. I expected most people would want to see the ISAB monkey, both for the meme factor, and also because I thought this was honestly kind of the most impressive option, beating an entire Chimps run with a 032 Robo Monkey as your main DPS. I thought if that didn't win, then it would probably be the Ultra Boost plus Crossbow Master combo, just because those are two very rarely seen towers in Chimps mode. And I thought the Polkai would probably take third place, just off of being the newest option in the vote. So I really expected the Sentry Champion was going to be the least popular option here, but sure enough, I got the exact opposite, with Sentry Champion winning the vote by a long shot, and the only one even coming close being the Polkai, the other one I didn't expect to win. So yeah, that caught me off guard. Guess it's all the more reason I'm glad I did this vote, because I was not expecting this would be what you wanted. So if you want to get involved in the next vote, that should hopefully be going up soon. Keep an eye on my community tab and you can vote on the next video. I'll obviously be having all the same options, except I'll replace the Sentry Champion with another one that I might do in future. With all that said, let's talk Sentry Champion. This is one of the very first towers I wanted to try with Unpopular Chimps when I first had the idea, but initially the map I tried using it on was Another Brick, and while that's technically an easier map, it really didn't seem to suit Another Brick well. So I took a break from this run, which lasted a lot longer than I intended, honestly, and decided to try it again much later, this time on Midnight Mansion. The Sentry Champion isn't necessarily a hated tower. I don't hear many people running to call it awful, but it's certainly, by the same token, no one is clamoring to use it either. In fairness, there is good reason for that to be the case. The Sentry Champion suffers from a combination of problems which alone would be fine, but together make it rough to use. For one, it's too well-rounded and not specialized enough. Group damage is good, but not enough for some of the extremely late-game clumped rounds. Single target TPS is better, but still not enough to hold its own come late game. SRAM damage is good, but not great, and very inconsistent. And DDT defense, well, it exists, you just gotta give it camera detection, but again, it's got no way to slow DDTs, so it's just not the best option in terms of destroying DDTs. It often needs a little bit of help, especially on 95, where the purples can absorb his shots and make it so it can't even shoot the DDTs. Okay, so maybe it won't hold its own in all aspects come late game, but that can be fine, so long as it acts as an effective bridge tower. The Crossbow Master, which we'll be getting a video in future, is a great example of this. The Crossbow Master has the same problem as the Sentry Champion, being sorta too well-rounded for its own good. However, where the Crossbow Master succeeds, unlike the Sentry Champion, is in costing a lot less, being able to pop all balloon types in the game without any outside help, and having stronger upgrades before the 5th tier on its own upgrade path, which make it easier to get to this upgrade without having to spend extra money. Those advantages allow you to use the Crossbow Master as extremely cost-efficient defense all the way up until the 90s in many cases, allowing you to save up for and afford insanely expensive late-game defense without dying in the process. The Sentry Champion, on the other hand, is simply not cheap enough. It can't handle enough on its own to warrant the higher price tag on it. And while its damage potential is certainly higher than the Crossbow Master, a lot of that relies on support which gets expensive fast, which kind of negates the whole cost-efficient side of things, and on top of that is inconsistent damage output, which means you're more likely to leak to random balloons if this is the only tower you're using to save up money. So, okay, beginning the video by trashing the upgrade I'm supposed to be showing off is all well and good, we all love a bit of that, but let's talk why I even wanted to do this tower in the first place if apparently it's just so awful. Well, that's because of the Sentry Overclock combo. If you weren't aware, buffing the attack speed of your engineer does in fact make them play sentries faster as well, which means overclocking causes a massive spike in sentries being placed for an enormous surge of damage. This is a relatively well-known combo amongst more experienced players, but I've never actually seen anyone try to use it in a Chimps run before, and I've never known why, so I've always wanted to try it. All cards on the table though, I've got to be honest, this run was probably the most infuriating run I have had to do for Unpopular Chimps so far. Because while this was certainly not the hardest one I've done, not even close, it still ended up being the run where I probably had the most failed attempts. In total, I think there were 8 or 9 proper attempts, excluding runs that didn't even make it into the 50s to get this video done. And practically every death was to one tiny leak that absolutely I could have defended. I just got unlucky. My sentries were in the wrong place at the wrong time. A sentry explosion could have saved me, but it just went off in the wrong area. Or maybe I pressed an ability button that there was basically no way I could have predicted that it was going to backfire, but it does, and then I die and I can't use more abilities to save me because they're on cooldown. Now, over the course of this video, you're going to see footage of 3 of those runs. So let's go one at a time. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, I'm gonna cut this in somewhere. Crosspathing. Crosspathing with the Sentry Champion is actually kind of interesting because, well, this is actually an example where both the crosspaths have a pretty solid argument to be used. Now, in this case, I used the middle crosspath, which gives 2 benefits, but also a downside. The benefits are that the engineer gets way more range with this crosspath, but more importantly, they get the deconstruction upgrade. An upgrade which most people completely ignore the existence of for understandable reasons. All it does is make the engineer do +1 damage to Moabs and +1 damage to fortified balloons, which does stack, so if you do a fortified Moab, you get triple damage. And yeah, that might not sound like much, but once you start getting to, of course, the Sentry Champion, when you're actually attacking extremely fast with all your sentries, and each of those attacks are only doing 1 damage without any help, obviously triple damage to Moabs that are fortified is quite a bonus, and even double damage to normal Moabs is really, really good. So we take the deconstruction path. That being said, there is a downside to this path, and that is, while having more range does allow you to hit balloons from more distances, it also means there are more places the sentries can be placed. And while that sounds like it might be a good thing, it's usually a bad thing. It means that sentries are more inconsistent with where they explode, and that means that they are more likely to miss with their explosions and not catch as many balloons. The alternative path we didn't take would give oversized nails and pin. Now, pin doesn't interact at all with the sentries, as far as I'm aware, and, well, that makes sense. And of course, pin isn't the reason that you would take this path, although it can be useful to hold any early game balloons in place. But the more interesting part is that when you get oversized nails, it does affect the pierce of your sentries too, meaning that if we had gotten oversized nails, our Sentry Champion would have more pierce. And although they would have less range, that would also mean that the sentries would explode in the correct positions more often. There is a chance, in fact, that for rounds like 98, I might have been shooting myself in the foot a little bit by not getting this cross path. But 98 was the only round that really made me think I wanted the bottom cross path. Other than that, the middle cross path just provides so much bonus damage, especially to the bad, that it just seemed like it had to be the more worthwhile path. Though I'm not gonna lie, I didn't bother to lab it, so hey, I might have been wrong. You can test it yourself if you want to. Either way, back to wherever I was before I cut this in. Go. The footage that you're seeing right now is the first run that was my first serious attempt at the challenge. I did 2 or 3 little runs before this, but those were using Etienne instead of Sorda for camera detection. And since my strategy had developed to use a primary mentoring village anyway, getting Etienne over simply getting a radar scanner village and swapping out the hero for Sorda to make the early game 10 times easier just seemed kind of redundant and unnecessary. You can tell I'm kind of half winging it a little in this run. Literally all I have in mind is to super buff Sentry Champion and see what happens. Any of the things that I do are just for the sake of surviving the mid-game, including, most of all, getting the recursive cluster alongside the Sentry Champion. I did know I was going to need a glue storm no matter what, not only to buff the sentry damage, but also to deal with super ceramics, and that was why I was going to get the P mentoring in the first place, to get that 10% cooldown reduction on the storm for the lowest possible downtime. I'm so dead set on super buffing this Engie that I even gave it an alchemist buffs, just so that it places the turrets an extra 16% faster, even if that isn't all too much. This was also why in my first run I chose Recursive Cluster as the tower to pair with the Sentry Champion, because it was a primary tower that would get the benefit from primary mentoring, and on top of that, obviously it would cover the Sentry Champion's weakness against super ceramics. The last thing about this run that's quite different is what I ended up doing over here on the left. As you can see, I'm getting an absolute 0 ice tower, and that might seem a little bit strange. And to be honest, in hindsight, I'm not sure if this was the smartest decision, but essentially the logic at the time was, well, there's no way I'm swapping out this glue storm, but stacking Moab glue and glue storm could have some negative effects, since glues can overwrite each other. So, if I need another Moab slow that isn't going to be a Moab glue, and I'm not going to be relying on sabotagers, especially because they're not even primary monkeys, you know, the ninjas, I thought it seemed that it made way more sense to use Snowstorm. But clearly Snowstorm alone wasn't going to cut it, which is why I jumped to Absolute Zero, especially since it's going to get the cooldown reduction just like the Glue Storm. Obviously, this is a lot of money to be spending on something just that slows and doesn't even help out my Sentry Champion. But at the time, I thought it made sense because I was mostly scared about DDTs. Well, that being said, in hindsight, this run really had no business getting as far as it did, but it did get very far, and it might be in fact true that the reason why this run went so smoothly, despite the fact it was probably the least well-planned run I did, was probably because the Absolute Zero was catching anything that was going to leak and basically saved my ass every single time I was guaranteed dead. So you could say that the Absolute Zero maybe was a better idea than I thought, but it kinda ended up being my downfall, alongside another critical mistake I made. Because when I say this first attempt got far, I mean it got far. Very far, in fact. In fact, it got all the way to round 100 on my first try. So, what went wrong?
What?
Well, would you believe me if I told you the fatal mistake that sealed my fate this run was the practically arbitrary choice for me to put my main defense on the left side of the map instead of the right? I never thought this would matter, and in fact, I only put my defense on the left in the first place because I noticed while testing that the left shelf here actually allows you to jam a village a little bit further down in the bottom corner, allowing for more space than the right shelf does. And so I thought, well, that means I can get more towers in the range, the left side's going to be better. And that one seemingly insignificant arbitrary decision sealed my fate. The bad had way too many invincibility frames where they can't be targeted yet because they're still coming through the portal, and by the time it can finally be attacked, we've already lost too much DPS. I was wary that the bad may pose an issue before I hit round 100, but I figured, worst comes to worst, I could just get a first strike. Oh my god, I can't believe it. So let me explain, because I know this probably sounds like the dumbest, most fucking obvious mistake to make ever, but let me explain why I made this mistake. You see, even though I've known for ages that First Strike is an extremely useful upgrade for beating the bad on round 100, I've always had this perspective in the past like it's kinda cheating. Like, I don't actually think you don't deserve to win if you use it to win, but it just feels like a bit of a spoil sport, doesn't it? Just getting the tower where you press a button to kill the bad, rather than actually having the damage required to kill the bad. And so just as out of a pure fun thing, I've always found it more satisfying to kill the bad the proper way, quote unquote, rather than to get a first strike. So in the past, I have actually very, very rarely used the tower, and I've only started using it more recently, because obviously when I'm doing these more difficult challenges, I kind of got to take the gloves off and say, okay, right, I'm just using whatever I can to make this work. I'm not going to be like, I don't like First Strike. If First Strike gets the job done, I'm going to use First Strike. As a result, I barely used First Strike until the past year or so. And every single time I've attempted to beat a difficult map on Chimps, it has just so happened that I have not once needed a First Strike on a map that didn't have water. And so I literally never thought about the fact that you don't have the option to use First Strike if you're on a map with no water. That simply never came to my mind. And it happens so many times now that it just got baked into my brain. If you get stuck on 100, just get a First Strike. And here I was, stuck on 100 on a map with no water, so even though I could afford a First Strike, it doesn't matter. Wow, what a way to go. I just love, I want to be mad, but it's so hilarious. It's so perfect. It's like, I don't mess up for any reasons that are quote-unquote smart. I mess up because I put my defense instead of the left and the right, and I thought I could get a First Strike on a map with no water. It's poetic, man. It's like a Greek tragedy where your fatal flaw is the thing that inevitably becomes your downfall. I don't know. It feels like that, my fatal flaw is missing the obvious while overanalyzing everything else. Even once I realized I couldn't get a First Strike, I wasn't panicking yet because I thought surely I still had this under control. I had so much money left over, surely I could simply get a Moab Eliminator, which would be the next best thing. And hopefully that could clean up. Only to discover I was only about 1,000 off of being able to afford a Moab Elim. I seriously thought I could salvage this run by just spamming Assassins and getting a turbocharge at the back. And while it was kind of close, It was also not close enough for me to be able to believe there was a way to get through this. It was not happening. Clearly, the first run had failed. Well, either way, that first run was dead, and on to the second run we go. And while I could have just tried the same thing on the right side for this run, I really don't like doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And that first run was already pretty micro-intensive, and that made me even less want to go through all the tedium of having to get all the way back there. And so, instead of that, I thought, okay, let me rethink this defense, because I kind of winged it that first run. We got to round 100, so clearly it worked, but did it really work? I might have gotten kind of lucky, honestly, with how many times I had to do little things to clutch my way through rounds. It really didn't feel like a smooth ride. And so I thought, let's make a better defense this time. If we're going to have to restart, why don't we change the defense? Of course, as always, Sentry Champion is not changing, and Gluestorm wasn't changing either. Gluestorm was too important. But clearly it seemed like an absolute zero was too much money to throw into one tower when we needed bad damage, considering it did nothing to the bad. And so I decided to throw that out the window and just bite the bullet and get the Moab glue, even though I knew it was going to counteract the Gluestorm. At the end of the day, while this is absolutely anti-synergy, both of these towers are so ludicrously important to this run that we can't afford to not get either of them, or at least that's what I thought in my head. But other than that, what was different this run? Well, looking back, I felt like the clunkiest thing about my first run was the recursive cluster. It made a lot of sense at the time that I got it, and it certainly was easier to deal with in the earlier rounds, but by the later rounds, obviously it's not really ideal to have a single recursive cluster, even if it does have village and outbuff, be your main Super Saram defense. I'm kind of lucky I got away with it as much as I did. And I was thinking that if that was an issue, I could maybe try getting it to Bomb Blitz. And I know that Bomb Blitz isn't the strongest tower in the game, but I thought, oh, all the better for the video. I get to show off two weird and unusual towers in Chimps. But as the run kept progressing and I realized I wanted to get an absolute zero, of course I realized the Bomb Blitz wasn't happening. So if the Bomb Blitz wasn't happening and the recursive cluster was sketchy at best for the late game, why don't I get another tower to complement the DPS of the Sentry Champion? But what should that tower be? Well, to start, since we obviously have this primary mentoring village, we'd ideally want it to be a primary tower, not from any other category. Otherwise, we'd be kind of wasting our money with this primary mentoring. As well as that, this tower needs to make sure that it compensates for the shortcomings of the Sentry Champion. That being that while the Sentry Champion has a lot of Pierce, it's not quite enough to beat rounds like 98 and 96. And, of course, the fact that the Sentry Champion, while having very good bad damage, doesn't have enough to solo it, it seems. The final and most important thing, though, was the Sentry Champion was ridiculously inconsistent with dealing with Super Ceramics. Yes, it could deal with them, but a lot of what was allowing it to have enough DPS to clear up Super Ceramics were the huge damage you get from when the sentries explode and expire. And whether the sentries explode on the Super Ceramics you want them to is completely bullshit randomness. And so that means that is probably why this run was so frustrating. I kept dying to these random ceramics that by all means should have gotten popped, probably just because I got a bunch of unlucky locations for sentry explosions in a row. And when that ends up being something you consistently need to rely on just to survive, it's no wonder this run is so infuriating and so micro-heavy, since at any moment, all it takes for us to lose is for two sentries to just decide to be placed in stupid spots and consecutively explode in areas where they don't catch any blooms. Again, most of the time we just have so many sentries that something is going to explode in the right place. But at the end of the day, there is nothing stopping the sentries from exploding in every incorrect position and not catching a single bloom we actually need to destroy. At first, I'm not gonna lie, I was stumped as to what tower I was going to pair with the Sentry Champion. I mean, thankfully the fact that I really wanted it to be a primary tower kind of narrowed down my options, but even still, it was kind of difficult to find something that fit. I mean, it was just such a strange spread of options. I needed something that was good against Super Ceramics, but also the bad, when these are like completely opposite things. Not to mention, even if I found something that was both good against Super Ceramics and the bad, it still had to have at least decent Pierce so that we could survive through rounds 96 and 98. And that causes a huge issue, because these are all practically opposite things I'm asking for. How can one tower cover all these bases? And obviously one can't cover all of them perfectly, but I did eventually realize that this might be the perfect opportunity for a certain tower I've always had a soft spot for, but struggled to use, to shine. I have always loved the Bionic Boomer, and when it was first added in BTD5, it was probably my single favorite upgrade in the game. However, I've got to say, I really feel like the Bionic Boomer Middle Path Boomerang really took a nosedive in quality when it moved over to BTD6. And I know that it's not been nerfed or anything. If anything, it's gotten stronger in BTD6. I don't think the BTD5 Bionic Boomer ever did increase damage to Moabs, and well, the current BTD6 one does. So if anything, it seems like it should be stronger. But it just feels like BTD6 has so many ludicrously powerful options for a couple thousand cost upgrades, which are great with dealing with group balloons, but also deal good Moab damage. I mean, even just Recursive Cluster kind of outclasses the Bionic Boomer, which is kind of a shame. As a result, I've always wanted to use more of the Middle Path Boomerang, but I just feel like it doesn't really have a place in BTD6 anymore. And I've really hated admitting that, because it's still fun to use, it just really feels like it doesn't stack up to the competition. All that being said, I still have a soft spot for the upgrade path, and I've always wanted to feature Permacharge in one of these videos. But I just kind of came to the sad conclusion that because Permacharge is so well-rounded, and again, isn't as cheap as the Crossbow Master is, it kind of runs into the problem where it kind of feels like you can't even really show it off a lot of the time. Because even if you do super buff it, there's not a lot of things it really needs help with. It's mostly just that if you take the bottom cross path, its pierce is kind of low, although it is very high if you take the top cross path. Other than that, the Permacharge kind of has good attack speed, good damage, good pierce, good range, good basically everything, and again, that sounds good on paper, but when you realize that means it has no specialized purpose, it makes it really hard to work around as a main defense option all the way to the end of the game. Because here, we need a tower which is good against Super Ceramics, which I definitely believe the Permacharge is good against the bad still, which I also think it is pretty good against the bad. There are certainly better options, but we don't need the best options. We just need an option that is pretty good that can still deal with Super Ceramics. And really the only thing it doesn't tick the boxes on here is Pierce. And don't get me wrong, yeah, it's not got the best Pierce. However, we are going to be able to pair it with an Alchemist as well as a Primary Mentoring Village, which is going to give it more Pierce. And on top of all that, the activated ability does give it increased Pierce temporarily. And if the only rounds were really struggling for Pierce around 96 and 98, then I felt pretty confident that with good ability usage, we could cover all of our bases here. And this run definitely went a lot smoother. I did not have many issues on the way to 98 here. But then 98 hit. And well, I realized 98 was going to be a tougher one than last time because we were using the Permacharge instead of a Recursive Cluster, but I really wasn't expecting to have as much trouble as we did on it, especially considering how much money I saved up ready to make sure that if 98 was a problem, I could just spend money to get out of it. I was certain that we should be able to beat this round with just some good ability timings and just you having the right towers added into the fray to just thin out the hordes a little bit. But sure enough, round 98 was the downfall of this run. Quite simply, even with the spare 10k or so we had to spend on other defense, nothing could thin out the hordes enough. The Pierce was constantly being maxed, and the round is too long to get away with just one ability to bail you out. The ability doesn't last long enough, and it doesn't come back fast enough. It's just not enough. And that's a huge shame, because this really felt doable. I really did not want to give up on this run. I was certain there was something I was missing. I kept looking at my options like, seriously, with the amount of money I have right now, there has to be something in the game that can get me out of this. There's got to be something that can bail me out. And I kept looking at every option I had for high PS damage, and I just couldn't find anything. Everything I thought would work ended up doing 100 times worse than I expected, and I was all the way back at square one every single time. And I think, yeah, I hit a dead end here. I think I have to restart. It was really nagging me. Even after the restart, I kept thinking, I know there's got to be some tower in this game that could have bailed me out there. But every single time I looked through all the upgrades in the game, I was just drawing a blank. I was like, nothing here would work, and anything I'm looking at that I think, yeah, that should work, is worse than other options I've already tried, which I expected to work that didn't. So I really thought I'd hit a dead end here, and this really scared me, because I kind of didn't know what to do from here. I mean, I basically went in still with the same plan, just generally save even more money for 98 and be even more prepared, but I was kind of bothered by this idea, like, I couldn't think of anything that could get me through that round. Until eventually, once I started considering, okay, what's a bit more expensive than about 15k, which I think was about the amount of money I had, that I could get that could get me through that round much more smoothly. And that's when I laid eyes on it. A tower I've already covered in an Unpopular Chimps video, the Balloon Solver. And I thought about it, and I was like, okay, obviously that's a very expensive, almost nuclear option, and obviously this is once again another glue gunner who's going to cancel out my glue storm. However, it got me thinking, yeah, hang on a minute, why don't I try using the Balloon Solver? In my head, I'm thinking that's too much money to spend just to deal with super ceramics, but then I'm realizing that in this gameplay, I'm spending more than 15,000 just to deal with 98 super ceramics, and even still that isn't enough. If I'm going to be spending 20,000 or more, I may as well just go all the way and get a Balloon Solver. And if I get the Balloon Solver, do I really still need the permacharge? The only issue with that is if I would take the permacharge out of the picture and just use the Balloon Solver in combination with the Sentry Champion, then I'm going to get stuck in a situation where I'm just going to die to the bad on round 100 again, unless I can get some really big damage amplification. And that got me thinking, hang on a minute, could this be time we bring back a classic combo? Now, all cards on the table, this ended up being another failed attempt, and unfortunately I deleted the footage for this attempt because at this point I had failed so many times I just started deleting the footage of every run I failed, and I kind of assumed that this was going to be my winning strategy. So I thought, well, you'll see the strategy when I get the winning attempt. But as you can guess by me telling you all this, it didn't end up being my winning strategy. Although it wasn't a bad idea. If you don't remember, a while ago when I beat my first expert chimps maps using the Balloon Solver for one of my first episodes of Unpopular Chimps, I said that I wanted to try using Super Brittle with Balloon Solver, a pretty novel combo that I had come up with, which I hadn't seen anyone using, which allows the Balloon Solver to do so much increased damage that it could essentially deal with a near infinite number of any kind of balloon that doesn't have as much health as a fortified Zong or more. Which essentially means it beats every single balloon in the game so long as it has camera detection, except the 2 fortified Zongs on 97 and the bad on round 100. Which, I mean, that's a pretty sweet deal. Sure, it may be a combo of 2 5th tiers, which probably adds up to about 60,000 in total, but for that 60,000, you are getting a combo which literally deletes every single balloon in the game except 3 of them. That's quite a lot of damage you're getting. And here it really did seem kind of like the solution, because we kept having these extremely frustrating deaths to ceramics, and in theory the Balloon Solver would just clean these up with ease. The Balloon Solver would destroy everything that passed it, and we'd never die to a stupid leak again like we did with all our other strategies. Again, the only issue was the bad damage, which then the Super Brittle covers, because even if we lose the Glue Storm, which was going to be a lot of our bad damage, the Super Brittle is literally more than twice as effective as the Glue Storm. It just needs to be in range of the bad. And it's not dependent on an ability, of course. And when you combine that with the fact that both Balloon Solver and the Sentry Champion get an enormous benefit from the damage boost, that means we should have more than enough bad damage. And this seemed logically like the best possible combo we could try. But obviously, it didn't work. Now, I want to be clear that I think it definitely could have worked, but essentially it still had the same consistency issues we were having the whole time. And to be fair, maybe I should have seen this coming, but I just really thought with that extra range from primary mentoring and extra attack speed from the middle crosspath, that the Super Brittle would make sure to hit every target. And in fairness, this time it wasn't the same problem as last time, where the Super Brittle always missed the literal last DDT in the entire game on round 99, even though it caught every DDT on 95, 93, and 90. But no, this time it wasn't that it was missing DDTs, it was just sometimes it wasn't catching all the Moabs when there were loads of Moabs stacked on top of each other for rounds like 98. And once again, I'm pretty sure there probably was a way I could win with this strategy, but at this point I want something consistent, damn it. I don't want something where I have to constantly be pressing buttons and micromanaging everything just to stay alive. I want something that I slap down and it works. So eventually I got frustrated with this strategy and was almost prepared to try something different, but the problem was I was really running out of options at this point. I really couldn't think of what else I could try to pair with this tower, and I was almost considering scrapping the run. Not even out of a, this is too hard, but more, I want to tear my hair out and don't want to do this anymore. More, this whole challenge should have been over a whole week ago. More, I am sick of staring at this map. I was almost prepared to try one final strategy, which quite honestly would probably have been an even dumber idea than anything else I'd tried so far, but it would at least be something different. That being, back when I was trying to figure out what I'd even do for my second attempt, before I decided on the permacharge, The best candidate I had, though I had mixed feelings about the idea, was potentially the Inferno Ring. Now, this upgrade is way too expensive for me to go for realistically if I still want to get a Sentry Champion and also super buff that Sentry Champion. And on top of that, I thought the idea of having to stick it out with a Ring of Fire before I could get the Inferno Ring itself seemed really sketchy as well. But at this point, I had already tried so many dumb things, and with the previous Balloon Solver strategy, I literally had to stick it out until like the 60s with a defense of practically nothing more but a single Balloon Liquefier and a single Sexpert. I had seen some very dumb openings. So at this point, the idea of having to stick it out with nothing more than a Sexpert and a Ring of Fire was starting to sound a lot more appealing compared to the kind of shit I was resorting to by this point. And just as I was about to finally try it, something just clicked in my head. Almost out of nowhere, a synapse fired and I realized, wait, that second run that I lost all that time ago on round 98, that wasn't screwed. There was something I was forgetting. There was a tower that I could more than afford that would have destroyed that round that I never got. And the reason I never thought of it, even though it's a tower that I myself advocate for and think is kind of underused, is because I was too busy thinking, what is a high PS, high damage tower that will save me this round? And because I was thinking in terms of DPS towers with high pierce and high damage, I did not think to use the Alchemist. Because the answer to my conundrum was to use Unstable Concoction. I don't know if you've ever used this upgrade because lots of people never touch this upgrade path, because the 4th tier and 5th tier upgrade on this path fucking sucks. However, the 3rd tier upgrade, Unstable Concoction, unfortunately tends to get bundled in with those two much worse upgrades, and it often doesn't get recognized for the powerhouse it really is. Unstable Concoction isn't cheap in fairness, costing just over 3,000. But when you get it, it makes it so that whenever you hit a Moab with one of your potions, it now gets an effect where when it dies, it explodes. Now, unfortunately, they did make it so that the explosion cannot hit the insides of the Moab that explode. It can only hurt other things near that Moab, which means the ceramics inside a Moab won't get blown up in the explosion. However, other Moabs near to that Moab can be destroyed by the explosion of that Moab. And because of course potions have splash damage, it is not that hard for an Unstable Concoction Alchemist to catch every single Moab in 98 with this explosive acid. And that means you can set off a chain reaction, where once one Moab starts exploding, they all start blowing up on top of each other, and while one Moab can't destroy its own ceramic insides with its own explosion, when there are 5 other Moabs next to it which are also going to explode, which are allowed to destroy the ceramics inside that Moab, it practically doesn't matter. Add on top of all of this the fact that the damage you get off the Unstable Concoction explosion depends on the health of the Moab, so the bigger health Moabs have more damage on their explosions, and you get a recipe for some absolute destruction. This is probably the single best, most cost-efficient upgrade in the game for absolutely annihilating round 98, and I never thought to use it, because I had tunnel-visioned myself into thinking only high pierce, high damage towers, and I didn't think to use the Alchemist. Wait, that means the permacharge strategy could have worked. If I could time travel all the way back to that round 98 run and just put down an Unstable Concoction, we win. And it's not even just we win with money to spare. I briefly considered if I really wanted to do the same strategy all over again. Again, I didn't like the idea of having to try the same thing over and over and over. It was boring and I didn't like it. However, I decided, yes, I'm going to go through with this. In this case, I didn't mind having to get all the way back to round 98, because not only did I know this was going to work now, but I also knew not only that it was going to work, but that I would have money to spare. I wasn't going to have to pinch every penny just to make sure I lived, because I already knew this defense could consistently shred every round except 98. And so, if I had a little bit of money to spare, then I could finally do something I was dying to do this whole time, but kept refraining from doing out of fear that if I just spend too much money on this stuff that I don't really need, that I'll lose on round 100 again. And that is, I was sick of dying to one random blue balloon that sneaks down the left path while I'm not looking, and I was more than ready to simply just get a blowback option. Whenever I did get sabotages, I was getting the distraction ability, so sometimes that was distracting balloons, but clearly that wasn't enough. It was time for me to get a downdraft heli. Oh, wait, this map literally doesn't let you place a heli anywhere, even if you clear all available space. A Druid of the Storm! So yeah, Druid of the Storm, definitely not my favourite tower in the game, and definitely if I want blowback, I'm basically always going for a downdraft telly instead. However, I've got to say, using it in these runs, I'm impressed actually. I haven't used this tower in a while, and last time I gave it a chance, it was very underwhelming. But it really does seem like they've been given quite a lot of help recently, and I'm actually kind of impressed by what I've seen. I might start using them a little bit more in future, but I'm not going to call them underrated yet until I've messed around with them a little bit more. Either way, I mostly got them here just because, as I said, I was so sick of having to constantly mash escape, paranoid that at any moment, a tiny balloon that I should have seen but didn't spot, that really should have died but I just got unlucky, reaches the exit. You know, I didn't want this anymore. I just wanted to be able to put Druids of the Storm at the exit, so whenever one nasty little balloon sneaks through, I could just blow them back and then they're dead. And again, I hadn't done this even once on my other runs before, even after run after run after run of failure where a single Druid of the Storm may have saved me, just because I thought, I'm going to be kicking myself so hard if I win, but then actually I die at the last round because I needed 100 extra cash and I wasted a good 2,000 on a Druid of the Storm I didn't really need, but I was just sick of getting, dying to leaks or whatever. But at this point, I was finally prepared enough to know that I had the money to spare. At this point, I had enough experience and enough knowledge to say, this is going to work and we can get Druids of the Storm and it will not make us die to the last round. Even still, even on this winning attempt, I still had a miniature heart attack. Because, while I was being round 98, it was still closer than I expected. I thought the Unstable Concoction might make this easy, and while it certainly saved our ass, it did not necessarily make the round easy, quote unquote. And I still had to try it a few times, and in fact, I got so panicky and nervous, I accidentally mashed all my ability buttons to get through the round, and forgot that the whole reason I wasn't doing that on my first couple attempts was so that we wouldn't die to round 99, where fortified DDTs come. And I was terrified that I'd actually just fucked up in one of the most dumb ways possible by blowing all of my abilities on 98 and having nothing ready for the start of 99. Thankfully, though it took a while, I did figure out a way to beat 99 without the abilities being on cooldown and ready when the round starts, and that thankfully meant we finally had our winning run. Jeez. Okay, as I said, this took way longer than it really had any right to. This whole fiasco could have taken a good 6 hours less time if just on the first attempt I put my defense on the right instead of the left. And I can't believe that one thing is what put me through so much hell. But either way, we have gotten to the end of this. Do I think the Sentry Champion is good or bad or underrated or what? I've got to say, I understand why it's not really used now. I don't like to say this because don't get me wrong, I'm not making it out like it wasn't worth the money. It's more just, I don't want to deal with this tower's bullshit. I actually think, given the support, this tower's damage is very good. And I think that it's not too hard to get to the support. As obviously Gluestorm is a tower that I'm getting practically every Chimps run now anyway, regardless of tower. So of course I would like to have a Gluestorm anyway, and the Gluestorm pairs really well with, of course, the Sentry Champion. But in this final winning run, I actually didn't bother getting an overclock. I was planning to, but I also wasn't about to fuck over my entire run just because I was that desperate to do the funny overclock shenanigans. This run is actually nothing more than damage amp. There is actually no overclock synergy in this run that won. So I think that kind of demonstrates the problem here. Sure, the impressive damage you get from overclock plus, Sentry Champion is really cool, but in an actual Chimps run, you just don't need that much damage for anything except the bad, and even if you want the bad damage, there are better options. So in fact, the combo isn't very useful. The only thing that's really useful with it is damage amp towers. And don't get me wrong, it was very useful with damage amp towers, but that's the thing. It was only really with the damage amp towers. And if you're going to pair something with damage amp towers, there are better options in the game than the Sentry Champion. Not that the Sentry Champion is bad, once again, man, I'm having to say that a lot, but if I'm going to pick something to pair with something like a Brittle or a Gluestorm, I'm probably going to pick a Tack Zone. I'm probably going to pick a Fan Club. I'm probably going to pick a Sky Shredder. I'm probably not picking the Sentry Champion. The only thing that comes to mind that I might still be overlooking is it could still be the case that the Sentry Champion is actually very powerful with Homeland Defense. And while that does sound fun and kooky, holy shit, man, I am not ready to do that right now. I'm already sick of having to deal with this tower's bullshit with how many times it just misses things that I know it can kill. And then, on top of all that, this just doesn't seem like a good strategy. It sounds fun, and I'm willing to try it, but I mean, have you ever tried to save up for a Homeland Defense and Chimps? You wouldn't think it's that bad because it's cheaper than an Inferno Ring at first glance, but when you realize that the 2 upgrades that come before it on its path cost 21,000 and 7,000, you realize that actually you spend about as much money on a Homeland Defense as you do on a big plane, despite the fact that the Homeland Defense up front seems a lot cheaper. As a result, the Homeland Defense is a super difficult tower to be able to save up for and actually afford. And so I don't really know if Sentry Champion Homeland Defense is a real strat. But hey, maybe down the line I'll give that a go. Either way, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Make sure to vote on it if you want to see a certain strategy over another one. I'll probably be adding another one to the docket now that this one has been done. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.